and I'm going to welcome everyone to the Sunday night, September 13th, IWWG open mic featuring Georgia Popoff and Antoinette Brim in poetry, as well as this wonderful audience of open mic readers and listeners. Now, before we get to the open mic, I want to tell you a little bit about Georgia, who is going to read first. And I've got my notes right here. I'm going to read her bio. And Georgia is from Syracuse, New York. Wave, Georgia. Wave to everyone if you would. There you go. And she's an educator, an editorial consultant, and workshops coordinator at the YMCA of Central New York's Downtown Writers Center. She has 4 poetry collections, most recent, Psychometry, published by Tiger Bark Press, 2019. And you can visit her website at georgiapopoff.com. I will put that into the chat room if you give me a minute. And Poets Happy Dance and more information. Welcome, Georgia. We're so glad that you are here tonight. And also, I'm going to introduce Antoinette Brim-Bell and let you know that Antoinette is the author of These Women You Gave Me, published by Indolent Books, Icarus in Love, published by the Main Street Rag, and Psalm of the Sunflower, published by Aquarius Press / Willow Books. She is a Cobb Conham Foundation Fellow, a recipient of the Walker Foundation Scholarship in the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, and a Pushcart Prize nominee. Her poetry, memoir, and critical work have appeared in various journals and magazines, as well as in anthologies, including Villanelle's, Stand Our Ground, poems for Trayvon Martin and Marissa Alexander, Critical Insights, Alice Walker, 44 on 44, African-American writers on the 44th President of the United States, Not a Muse, Just Like a Girl, a Manifesto, and The Whiskey of Our Discontent, an anthology of essays commemorating Ms. Gwendolyn Brooks. Welcome to both of you. So glad you're here tonight. Georgia, you are going to read for us first. Let me just give one more reminder, if I might, to the readers and listeners who are here tonight. Our chat room stays open. It's the whiteboard that you access where you can type in, you can write to all panelists. That's all of us, because we're all panelists in here now. And please feel free to comment as you hear their poems, as you feel like you have a question, because we will have a Q&A when they're done reading. We'll ask you, you're able to ask a couple of questions, put your questions in the chat room, put your responses in the chat room so everyone could take a look at them. And also, I just want to say, feel free to say who you are and where you're from. We do love to know where everybody is calling in from around the country and around the world. And if you haven't done that yet, please feel free to say hello. Georgia, welcome you to our open mic, and thanks for being here tonight. I'm going to, I'm not able to unmute you, so just, there you go, you're good.
Yeah, I couldn't unmute myself either, so we were, I was like, I can't talk. Hi everyone, I'm so glad to be here tonight, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to read with my dear friend Antoinette. My book, Psychometry, launched about 6 weeks before we went into quarantine. So it's been a rough time to push a new book that you worked 10 years for. And it's a book with 3 sections of persona poems. I'm going to read from the title section tonight. The 4th section of the book is back to my own voice after working in persona for about 8 years, and that was terrifying. So this first section is all based, psychometry is the art of divination in which the psychic holds an article from the belongings of the, an article or belonging from the person who has passed when you're getting a psychic reading to connect with an ancestor. And all of these poems are based on that premise. This first one is about Janice Joplin and includes a quote from Janice: "I'm a victim of my own insides." Janice Joplin's Cowbell. Pearl was every kind of fire, I still smell her fingers all smoky and urgent, gripping me the way she clutched at life, doubt, the men who played her. She was the region between drumstick and silence. I was her flint. Forgotten on this shelf, I bear her brand on my flank. So that's the poem that opens Psychometry and grew out of a conversation about Janice Joplin I had one evening with Dorianne Lux and Cornelius Eady, and I woke up the next morning with the poem. So I'm always grateful for them that we talked about her and that I got to see her live. I'm reading the next poem because it's very pertinent to today in its own way. Mary Mallon was also known as Typhoid Mary, and she was incarcerated for life. She was given life imprisonment on North Brother Island without a trial, without a lawyer, without anything. And this is in honor of her. In one of the many letters she wrote to try to argue her way back to freedom, she says, I have never had typhoid in my life. Why should I be punished like a leper and compelled to live in solitary confinement with only a dog for a companion? Mary Mallon's lab coat. The children sickened first, then the maids and mothers. Simple amenities afforded her by the rich were forfeited. The morning the authorities found her the second time she balked, raising her carving fork like a saber. They confiscated her knives. They dragged her off in an ambulance, then to that godforsaken island, its barren little cottage with a cold stove and one severe tree. She was feisty at best, a scrapper for certain. Some declared her a bold liar. But I knew her to be a cunning survivor. As a girl, she schemed to make her talent serve her well. Instead, her body betrayed her, as did the health department and the press. Terminally exiled, at first Mary filled spare time with modest tasks assisting the nurses. One day she finally relented. She forsook kitchen memory for test tubes and stool samples. As if it too was infected, Mary rolled the apron that had shielded her from sputter and spite into a ball, pressed it to the back of the bureau drawer behind rows of cotton socks and her Bible. She found peace in the laboratory, preparing slides as close to cooking as she could get. Tiny thunders of typewriter keys bade her futile appeals. I have been, in fact, a peep show for everybody. The tuberculosis men would say, there she is, the kidnapped woman. Perhaps her resilience rather than mere disease proved the truer threat, or her brogue, or that stubborn streak. Like milk gone sour, bitterness coursed through her curdled heart, conferring her a pariah, husbandless and empty. Late at night, she paced the North Brother shoreline with the other gray ghosts, glaring across the East River waiting for judgment. She'd no sooner walk the moon than the Bronx streets on the other side, nothing left but surrender and the howl of her skinny dog. And this last poem I'd like to share with much gratitude. Thank you for being here and listening to my words. This is the first poem that started the series, and it's about Harriet Tubman. And you need to know a couple of things for context in the poem. Her first husband was John Tubman. Her second husband after the Civil War was Nelson Davis, and she was a very close confidant and friend of Captain John Brown. Harriet Tubman was quoted to say, "Never kill a snake, kill it." Miss Tubman's dress form. My hard frame mimics her waist with a younger sister's envy. My dear friend and I have long paired to benefit her modesty. Her calloused fingers tickle as she patiently pins each swatch, worsted, wool, muslin for underskirts, garments of delicate skill. Yet not once has she ever pricked my gray skin. I cannot break her habit of that weathered kerchief wrapping her short crown of hair. Besides myself, only Mr. Tubman and Mr. Davis have been privileged to witness the strength beneath the many layers covering her below the neckline. I welcome most the intimate protection when camisole and slip take form, her humming accents that fugue of thread being pulled through the sheer cotton. Her lips flutter her lips flutter quiet prayers, like gypsy moths drifting on small gusts of laughter as nieces and nephews frolic in the side yard, muffling these whispers, the floss of her rote scripture. We have our home now. Brick walls, china branded with small roses from the Seward coffers. Her bed is piled with frailest quilts and tender moonlight that abides no threat. Still, I question how well she has adapted to a soft mattress. Her back is more accustomed to the awkward comforts of moss when her rest was bound by tree bark and low-hanging clouds. I watched her stubbornly push that bed to the window unaided just to be closer to the winter air, to gaze past the frost-glazed sill. She often thrashes, her feet trudging through snow under phantom full moons. My single leg holds me fast as I stand silently, sentry of this corner. I cannot free her troubled sleep of Captain Brown's broken body dangling in the December wind. Her work is clearly incomplete. Folks knock at the door at all hours. So what of Nelson's devotion once he arrived? He walked so far to declare his love. She, more than any, can value the currency of his effort. He withheld his kisses until such guarded nights when the house was dead beneath the North Star and only mice were listening. Of my beloved Harriet, I confide, our wombs are empty twins. Hers is a hollow cave of salvation gifted to others. Mine is lost to mere utility, a small grid of braces holding back to front. Thank you for listening.
Feel free to comment, everyone, in the chat room. Thank you so much, Georgia. It was lovely. You've muted. Thank you so much. I'm going to have you unmute if you can, Antoinette. Not unmuted yet. Okay, there you go. You're good.
Here we go. Well, I want to say thank you to IWWG for inviting me. I want to say thank you to Georgia. That was an absolutely wonderful reading, and I would encourage everyone to purchase the book. I think there is a link in the chat. So I'm going to read 3 poems from a new book project that I'm working on. I'll begin with the title poem. It's called America's Rorschach Test. So a Rorschach test is a test where you look at ink blots and you tell the tester what you see in the image. So this poem has 7 ink blots. America's Rorschach Test, blots 1 through 7. 1. Beaded cornrows click, barely bigger than her sign, Red Summer 2020. 2. On the playground, Margaret calls me African black. I'd rather sticks and stones. 3. Miss Kindergarten teacher says, you're an asset to your race. Let's gentrify your dreams. 4. Uninformed reform. Medicine is poison. Take this now or wait. 5. Every day a climb up a thorned honey locust. 6. Thoughts and thinking thoughts, sending and praying prayers, mounting body count. 7. Flashbang grenades, cherry blossom shudder, weep pink petals. This next poem was curated by Marilyn Nelson for Poem a Day, and it's on that website. It's called Black Mamas Praying, and it's written in the duplex form that was created by Jericho Brown. Duplex, Black Mamas Praying. Black mamas stay on their knees praying, cursing the lies folks tell about how the world don't need you. The world don't need you is a lie folks tell themselves when they step over blood-gelled black and slick. Folks step over black blood gelled and slick to get on with things. Don't bring bones to the cemetery. Bones in the cemetery hear the prophecy together, bone to bone, tendons and flesh, skin. Bone to bone, tendons and flesh, skin together. 4 winds breathe into these slain that they may live. Breathe 4 winds into these slain that they may live. Calling forth prophecy is no light work, no. But for Joshua, the sun stood still, the moon stopped. Black mamas stay on their knees, praying, praying. This last poem was inspired by the narrative of Frederick Douglass. So he tells this story in his narrative about how he became, quote unquote, unmanageable. So they sent him to Mr. Covey, who was a slave breaker. But Covey was so brutal that one day he pushed Freddie too far, and the young Frederick Douglass actually fought back. Now, what's so inspiring to me about this story is that when Covey gives up, Douglass says in that moment that he, Douglass, ceased to be a slave on the inside. So even though he was still a slave on the outside, he knew that one day his outsides would match his free insides. So during this, epic battle between Douglass and Covey, there's another slave who's watching, and his name is Hughes. And so the poem is written kind of from his perspective. The poem begins with an epigraph that I have taken from the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. My resistance was so entirely unexpected that Covey, the slave breaker, seemed taken all aback. This gave me assurance, and I held him uneasy, causing blood to run. Mr. Covey soon called out to Hughes for help. Hughes, your thumbs hook themselves into belt loops threaded with frayed rope. You rock to and fro on ball and heel, dusty feet on dry ground. You sass back. My master ain't send me here to whip no man, you declare. You leave threshing floor and flail. Watch dust fumes bellow and burp. Mop your brow, then throw a stone, morning dove song out of time. Bless this bliss. 2 men doing what men do, bleed and curse each other's God. Oh, sinking sun, set aflame Hillsborough to Cordova for all our sakes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Antoinette. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you both. I'm going to encourage you who are in the audience listening to feel free to put a question, if you would, into the chat room. And I haven't seen any questions yet, but if anyone else has noticed a question for either one of them or a comment that you want to make, please feel free to put it in there. So what I would love to ask, and maybe both of you could unmute if you wouldn't mind, Georgia and Antoinette, so that we could just have a little bit of a conversation. And I could ask you a couple of questions. I'd love to talk. Will you two unmute? Can you? You should be able to both. No? Why not? Okay.
Now I can. There's something weird. I keep getting blocked.
All right. Okay. No worries. No worries.
Oh, there she is.
You're both able to talk now. Wonderful. Thank you. Well, it was really interesting to hear you both and almost hear you having a conversation with each other as well. Your poems having a conversation with each other. I know that you've been friends, fellow poets for a long time. I wondered if you would talk a little bit about your poetry friendship and perhaps some of the threads that connect you both that you feel. What draws you to each other in the work that you do?
Like you start.
To start.
You start.
I think we connect as women first, and we like and respect each other so much. And it happened to be poetry that put us in the same kind of space. So I'm forever grateful to poetry for giving me Georgia. But also Georgia is like an on-point reader, right? She like gets in there and she really reads carefully. My first poetry mentor, David Kluhl, said that you write for the careful reader. And she's a very careful reader, and she's not afraid to challenge me on the choices that I make. And I appreciate that because it takes me to the next level. And then too, oftentimes I say I teach because I have a captive audience. I want to talk about poetry. So if you take my class, you have to talk about poetry with me. Georgia wants to talk about poetry. And so we talk about poetry for hours and hours. And she doesn't, her eyes don't glaze over and she doesn't say, oh God, I wish this woman would shut up. So, yeah, that makes us, very close, I guess, friends too, when it comes to craft and craft issues. What do you think, George?
Well, yeah, that was a beautiful way to put it. And thank you. And thank you for the honor, what you said about me, but you do the same thing. And we both, not only are we thrive in the aspect of creating the poem, but even more in revising the poem. So we push each other hard and grow for it. And Antoinette is also a very loving and generous friend. And
oh geez, only that, huh?
only that. And we're at the point now that I think like 3-4 mornings a week we start our days. We especially since COVID, and with our friend Demetris as well, Demetris Worley, another incredible poet. But it's about the work.
Right.
I'm sorry, Kelly, what were you saying?
Oh, you're right. It sounds like you're writing together. You're part of.
We're writing parallel.
Parallel, yeah.
Yeah, we're writing parallel. We have very different system or different processes. I am very much committed to free verse because I just am I'm an obstinate girl. I don't want to deal with the structures that often, but I know how to do them. I'm just not as skilled. Antoinette loves the challenge, and it comes so much more naturally to her. Only I think I do need to do a duplex pretty soon. But we just very often are in writing verse at the same time, but if one of us gets stuck, we can get the other unstuck.
Yes.
I don't believe in the term writer's block. because you're still you don't stop being a writer. You're just not actively producing new work. And if you're not, then read work of others. Get out those things. I don't like the term shitty first drafts. I think that's pejorative to the work, that the draft is just the starting point. And I heard it called points of discovery. Is that what you said, Antoinette? You call them the drafts of discovery? Or was that Christopher Citro?
I think that was Christopher, but I agree with you. I mean, getting the first draft out on the page, that's a gift, you know? I think oftentimes for writers, the scariest thing is a blank piece of paper or a cursor just on a screen. But the moment that you know, put something down on it, it's the beginning of something. And that's, you know, really super exciting. And I love the revision process. You know, I will put it away and come back to it, and then put it away and come back to it again. And to me, challenge, yeah, I guess form is a challenge for me. But I have to say, you know, Georgia was talking about how she's a free verse girl. I started out that way too. So when I was in my MFA program, our founding chair, Eloise Klein-Healy, said to me, you know, I want you to play with form. And I was at a time in my life when I was, you know, coming out of a divorce and all of this, and I wanted to be free. And I was like, no, Eloise, everything has to be free verse. I can't be tied to anything. And she said, well, one day you'll discover that some things need the structure, need the form, you know? And then my first book came out. Then my second book came out, and I sent it to her because by the time it was all done, I laughed, realizing that the whole thing's in form, right? And I didn't say anything. I just sent it to her. And she was like, I told ya. And I have loved every kind of form ever since. Oftentimes, well, my process when I go to the page is, what form will best contain this idea? And that's where I go. I start knowing that I want to use a particular form. If I want something that's wailing or mourning, I know that I need a form that tends to repeat, because it makes that almost that whine, that wail. So it's a guzzle, it's a duplex, you know, it's some type of, you know, a repeating form. Sometimes I've got different ideas and I want to figure out how to put them all together. So I know it's got to be braided, so I can keep them somewhat separate, but then I can put them in juxtaposition. So I'm always looking for, you know, what is the proper container for, you know, what's the proper vase for these flowers, so to speak.
Right. Well,
Can I just piggyback on that for a second, Kelly?
Sure. And then I have another question from a reader, but yes, go ahead.
The other thing is, when I say I'm a free verse girl, it does not mean that I just put anything on the page either. I am very highly structured in the line, in the stanza, and each poem finds its own form. Sometimes they're very short lyrics, sometimes they're long narratives, sometimes they're hybrid, sometimes they're poems in parts, but there's not a syllable or word in one of my poems by the time I'm satisfied with it that hasn't earned its right to be in the poem.
Yeah, and I'm glad you added that. It's earning its right to be in the poem, and there is structure in what you said, the line, the stanza, everything. And interestingly, when you said that, it made me want to mention Antoinette is going to be leading a 4-week webinar for the Guild in October. That information will be released to you very soon. But I asked Antoinette what she would like to present over those 4 weeks, and she's going to structure the webinar of craft around the line. So just to give you a little preview on working on your lines. But I do want to address this wonderful question from Catherine Mary Maroney in the chat room. She says, I like that both of you chose people from history to base your poems around. And what was it about each person that made that moment in their history particularly personal for you to step inside it? And so let me just ask if each one of you might respond to one of those historic figures that you wrote about, and just say maybe what, like for Harriet Tubman or one of the other people that inspired you, what was it that made you really want to engage in the writing of the poem, to step inside of it?
Go ahead, Georgia, start.
Well, I had a list of them, and what would happen, I would just start doing research. And each of the women that I chose were women that, for one reason or another, I was just compelled with or discovered. One of them, Bonnie Parker, Clyde Barrow's partner, came out. I get a lot of my ideas from NPR, especially for this book. A lot of the characters who are in this book are from elements of things I've listened to different NPR radio shows. And there was a Morning Edition that they were having, Sotheby's was auctioning off the firearms of 1930s gangsters. And they said, yeah, 2 of Bonnie Parker's guns. And I went, wait. I sat up in bed and said, Bonnie Parker's guns? And I spent the whole day like just cruising around, looking at biographical information about Bonnie, finding out that she was a young aspiring poet, that she died when she was like 23 years old or 26 years old. I looked into what kind of guns she owned, how they were shot, what they were, and I just got consumed with
Well,
it.
why do you think, Georgia? Why the guns? What is it about Bonnie's guns?
The fact that a woman was a gunslinger, a young woman was so in love with a psychopath that she became one herself. I was just obsessed,
Yeah.
but each woman, like, I can't say each one chose me. Each voice chose me and
So
said,
there was,
but what I was looking for was
there's
not
a gunslinger in Georgia that we,
yeah, right. There really is.
gunslinger sociopathic.
But the other thing was, as I identified each woman on the list that I wanted to research and write about, and some never made it, so they're going to have to go into some other project. I would find myself challenged. See, this is where I challenge myself frequently. It had to be an item that you did not expect. Emily Dickinson could not be, it had to be something not unexpected. So it was her inkwell. Imelda Marcos could not be shoes, but
Right.
it was her 22 karat engagement ring. But Christine Jorgensen's first pair of pumps and JonBenet Ramsey's bedroom slippers.
Wow.
And like Joan of Arc's shears that she cut her hair with, which was a political act and a gender act and a blasphemy to some every time. It was that kind of questioning. For that's just for the first section of the book. And then the second section are all epistles. The third section is my favorite in a way because it's all individual poems written any given day by poets who only exist in my imagination.
So you wrote poems by imaginary poets?
Yes.
Women and men, or just women?
Oh, this whole book is a feminist statement.
Okay.
This whole book is women's voices.
Poems by women you imagined.
Yeah.
Fabulous, interesting.
Yeah.
Do us a favor while you're on the call today, when we're moving on to other things, Georgia, put a segment of one of those poems of Imagine. Just put it in the chat room. Can you copy and paste if you have a chance?
Yeah, that would take me a bit of work, but
okay, then don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
I'm not sure where I've got the manuscript stashed.
Yeah, okay, no worries. We will.
I think they're made. Oh, I'm not sure where they even are. I'm going to put my website up again.
It's a fascinating concept, and so I would just love you're teasing us with that. But Antoinette, and thank you so much for answering that in such a fascinating way, Georgia. Antoinette, take a stab at that question, if you would. What is it about the historic figure that grabbed you to say, write this poem?
Like Georgia, I take inspiration from everything that's all around me. When she said NPR, I had to smile because I've gotten so many images off of, Science Friday? Because I do a lot of natural images too. And I find that, in nature, there are so many crazy and amazing things that lend themselves my first book has a particular poem in there about how a sea cucumber, when it feels threatened, will throw all of its guts out and entangle the predator in its own tangle of guts and emotions and all of that kind of stuff. So I had to use that. Frederick Douglass's narrative is something that I haven't taught it recently, but I used to teach it a lot. And it has so many amazing lessons in it that are applicable to an individual. I talk to my students about how he says that, you know, he wasn't a slave on the inside, and he knew he could make the outside match the inside. And I tell them, like, right now, you're in school, you know, and you're a nurse on the inside or an entrepreneur on the inside, and there will come a time when the outside will match the inside. And then they begin to understand that this is not just some character that they're reading about in history, but this is a person who has same kind of hopes and dreams and things as they do. And so when I sat down to write this poem, I wondered, I wanted to write about that particular incident, but to come at it full front like that, I thought, you know, it's the way it's written, it can't really be said any better. But what happens when somebody is watching this moment of evolution? And so that's how I came to think about Hughes, who I'd never really thought much about, and what it's like to watch this moment in time. Which is, it's a very epic moment. Of course, we know this later from the narrative, but even in that moment, it was epic in that a Black man and a white man fighting a fair fight, just with their own, you know, physicality, their own strength, and for that moment having, you know, all societal norms pushed aside, just two men doing, you know, like, what men do, that's like a big thing, you know. And I just kind of wondered what, you know, Hughes might think from that perspective.
Yeah, thanks. That's really fascinating to hear what your frame was, that you weren't just going to, you know, tell it in the predictable narrative way, but that you really thought about how to actually frame it in a way that would engage the reader even more deeply in the bigger picture of that story. So, and really draw us in. I think we're gonna have to shift at this point, sadly, because I have lots more I'd love to talk to you about. But let's go ahead and shift, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you so much, Antoinette and Georgia. And please feel free, Antoinette and Georgia, if there's another link where your work is, put it in the chat room if you would, a hyperlink. And Leslie is clapping, and we're all waving our hands and clapping. Don't go anywhere, but we will turn it over to the open mic. And I thank you so much for being there. I'm going to actually stop the recording